Here we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to all you fire drill firefighters. And to those of you who are joining for the first time, welcome to the Fire Drill Fridays family as we learn about the climate crisis and what we can do about it. Each of you, can help us grow our movement by sharing today's rally so your friends and colleagues can join the movement. Because the more people who understand the potential climate catastrophe and are willing to act, the more chance we have to succeed. We need lots and lots of people because we have to succeed, right? So share in the however you go about doing that. And before I go any further, I have some good news, okay, with my xylophone. Guess what? The Empire State Building in New York is now powered entirely by wind energy. Isn't that great? Now listen, this is serious. I have to ask you all something, and it's important that you let me know. We are thinking about starting a once-a-month movie night, okay? Maybe Thursday night. We'd send you a link to a film or documentary related to climate and the environment, and you'd look at it. And then we would gather that night, maybe Thursday night, to discuss the film and drink, I call them quarantinis. We'll ask you all to send in recipes for a good Fire Drill Fridays drink. And we'll choose a recipe, the Fire Drill Friday team will, and then we'll send it out to everybody. Choose one and we'll send it out. So everybody will be drinking the same thing, alcoholic and non-alcoholic. I want to know if this is something that would interest any of you. Okay, would you let us know, please, in the chat or in comments? Thanks. And for those of you who are new to Fire Drill Fridays, you may be saying, hey, wait a minute, President Biden seems to be taking care of the climate crisis. Why is there still need for us to do anything? And, yeah, it's true. He is our first real climate president. And yes, he's already put through really strong policies, and we should acknowledge and celebrate all of that. I mean, it's beyond wonderful to feel that things are finally moving in the right direction. But there's a whole lot more that needs to be done, and it needs to be done fast. And some of it he promised in his campaign. I think it may be hard for average citizens like us to understand just how much power the fossil fuel industry wields over not just our government, the federal government and our local government, but all the world's governments. And there's still tremendous pressure being put on the Biden administration and their efforts. And big oil and gas and the politicians they buy are putting on a lot of pressure. And that means that we, you and me, and all the citizens who care about the climate and the planet, we are the only countervailing pressure on Biden and Congress. And we have to make ourselves felt, And you know what? When we do that, it makes us feel good. Kennedy knows that. Cara knows that. Kat knows that. Some of you know that, who've been with us for a long time. It makes us feel good because we know in our hearts, and we should, that we don't have very much time left if we're going to avert disaster. But if we're doing all we can better face our children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews when the time comes. And they ask us, because they will, what did you do to save the planet? Now, some of what President Biden has promised hasn't happened yet. And those promises are really critical to confronting the climate crisis, preventing the collapse of ecosystems, and avoiding more species extinctions. Biden, for example, could put a stop to all new oil and gas pipelines. He's halted the Keystone XL pipeline already. But there's still Enbridge Line 3 in northern Minnesota, and the Dakota Access Pipeline that runs through the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation in North Dakota. Oil Change International says, and this is really important, I've said it before, but all you newcomers, this is important. We already have more oil and coal and gas that's been pumped and fracked and mined already above ground than we can use. See, we have to stay at 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. We can't allow the planet to warm more than that. All of the scientists agree to that. And in order to keep at that 1.5 degrees Celsius level of warming, we cannot burn what we've already got. It has to remain unused, you know? We can't allow drilling and fracking and mining to continue, the new drilling and fracking and mining. I mean, if we can't use what we've already got above ground, then of course we shouldn't be going after more. So the new pipelines must be stopped. They must be stopped. Also, Line 3 in the Dakota Access Pipelines carry very damaging tar sands oil. I'm going to have a little drink here. The tar sands oil comes from Alberta, Canada. I mean, I wish all of you could see. I flew over it in 40 degree below weather and saw it, and it made my heart break and my skin crawl. So, and this tar sands oil is heavy and more damaging to the environment than regular oil. And it will be carried through lands that are sacred to the tribal nations there, and through communities of color and critical watersheds and habitats. And you know that since 2010, there have been oil spills in the US amounting to more than 7 million gallons of crude oil. Energy Transfer Partners is the company that owns a vast network, 86,000 miles of pipelines, including the Dakota Access Pipeline on Standing Rock Reservation. Their network has leaked or spilled more than 349 times in the past 8 years. In May 2016, the new Dakota Access Pipeline leaked more than 33 gallons of crude, and it took crews 12 days to locate the leak. And this is the company to whom Trump gave permission to cross sacred burial lands and drill under the Missouri River, on whose water millions of people depend. Of course he did. You know why? In the fall of 2016, Energy Transfer's founder and owner gave $250,000 to Trump's inauguration. And the next day, Trump issued an order to speed up construction of the pipeline without an adequate analysis of the environmental impacts. Well, the next year, the pipeline leaked at least 5 times, spills that threatened the wildlife as well as soil and water. And you know that they say water is life. People depend on water for life. Now, the environmental impact study hasn't been completed, but already Energy Transfer is seeking permission from states to nearly double the pipeline's capacity. President Biden has the authority to shut down the pipeline, and we have to pressure him to do it, demanding a just transition process with equivalent salaries and benefits. They must be immediately put in place to ensure that the crews and the supporting workers have family supporting jobs with benefits. But in addition to the Dakota Access Pipeline, we have the Enbridge Line 3 project that would partially replace a 60-year-old pipeline with a new one that would carry twice as much oil. It would travel 1,097 miles across Minnesota, spanning more than 200 bodies of water, including 22 river crossings, among them 2 underwater crossings. Well, they go under the waters at the headwaters of the Great Mississippi River. Right at the headwaters, where the Mississippi is just creeks coming down to form the Great Mississippi. Twice they would go under the headwaters. On the way, by the way, to Lake Superior, which is so important in terms of sending fresh water to people. Lake Superior is critical, and this oil line would go under Lake Superior, carrying 915,000 barrels of Canadian tar sands oil. Now, perhaps you feel it's I don't know, maybe it's a good idea to replace an old pipeline. But you see, Enbridge has testified in court that it's fully capable of operating the already existing line. It works just fine. But you see, Enbridge wants a new one that can carry double the amount of oil, which would unnecessarily lock us into years of more fossil fuels. The new Line 3 has twice been approved, but petitions to halt the construction have been filed by several Ojibwe bands, many environmental groups, and the state's Department of Commerce. Tribal leaders are especially concerned because the new pipeline threatens their wild life beds, which grow throughout the wetlands in northern Minnesota. And if it threatens the wild rice, it also threatens their culture. They claim that new evidence has emerged since the pipeline was approved, including a significant drop in oil demand because of the COVID pandemic, also because electric vehicles are on their way, and because the oil industry is in such decline. They say that if the new pipeline isn't built, the existing Line 3 would only be needed for a few more years. So why build a new one with twice as much oil? They and their allies, including more than 100 faith leaders and clergy, say that Enbridge is rushing to complete construction before their appeals have even been heard in court. You know, at this point, it's public outcry and pressure that will stop Line 3. And again, we have to demand a just transition for the workers. I'd like just to take a second to put all of this into historical context, which will help us understand the two totally opposing realities between Indigenous people and us white descendants of the European settlers centuries ago. The Indigenous peoples who are defending the lands and water are descendants of cultures and with powerful identities stretching back for centuries, long before white European settlers arrived on their shore. You know, in fact, at the time of conquest, there were more peoples and nations in the Americas, North and South, than in all of Europe. Those nations were deeply established and advanced. A matrilineal tradition of communalism existed and still exists in tribal villages, where people work their lands in the presence of their ancestors' graves, in harmony with the natural world, understanding that the land and water belong to everyone, considering the earth their mother, and that they are connected to the stars, part of a seamless web of life. And you know what? Quantum physics has proven that they're scientifically correct. We are composed, science now knows, of molecules from the stars. Isn't that great? And what Indigenous peoples have been telling us for centuries, and what science has finally shown to be true, is that we're all interconnected. And because of this, we're also interdependent. When humans begin to destroy one species or one portion of ecosystem, a domino effect is put in motion, causing the fabric of our common tapestry to unravel. And this is what is happening right now. Protecting this sacred harmony was in fundamental opposition to that of the white settlers who believed in a commercial economy, private property, the concept of individualism and materialism, the principles of man against nature. See, nature was a commodity, still is for white people, to be exploited for profit. Otherwise, nature just didn't matter. Great tribal nations were uprooted from their ancestral lands and deported to reservations. Smallpox infested blankets were given to native peoples, wiping out entire tribes. The immense herds of Great Plains bison, which tribes relied on for food and clothing and shelter, were strategically killed off in an attempt to decimate the people. In only 20 years, from 1872 to 1890, the number of bison dropped from over 50 million to less than 800. Nearly 400 treaties were negotiated and almost none of them honored by the United States. 60% of the land supposedly designated for Native Americans ended up being owned by white people. It just blows my mind that so many Indigenous peoples still reach out to us, call to us, imploring us to wake up before it's too late, and also putting their bodies on the line to stop the destruction. And all over the world, Indigenous people's courage has led to countless successes. Drunk with greed and hubris, we haven't listened until now, like a drunk hitting bottom, until we're staring climate catastrophe in the face. Now, more and more of us are realizing that we need to fundamentally alter our relationship to the natural world. The great hero of Standing Rock, Chief Sitting Bull, understood the problem with the white invaders when he said in 1877, quote, "The love of possession is a disease with them." Let's prove we can change. I'm very excited to introduce our guest today, who can bring us the most up-to-date news from the front lines of Minnesota, where construction is already begun on new Line 3. Tara Houska, Couchiching First Nation Anishinaabe, is a tribal attorney, founder of Giniw Collective, and a former advisor on Native American affairs to Bernie Sanders. She spent 6 months on the front lines fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline and is currently engaged in the movement to defund fossil fuels and a years-long struggle against Enbridge's Line 3 pipeline. She is a co-founder of Not Your Mascots, a group committed to positive representation of Native peoples. She is a TED speaker, the 2017 Harvard Public Interest Keynote, received an Awesome Women Award from Melinda Gates, a 2019 Rachel's Network Catalyst Award, and is featured in Women, A Century of Change by National Geographic. And Tara has written for the women-led climate anthology, such a wonderful book. It's called All We Can Save. She's written for the New York Times, The Guardian, Vogue, and Indian Country Today. She lives in a pipeline resistance camp in northern Minnesota. You know, it has been really hard getting in touch with Tara and our other friends up at Line 3 in northern Minnesota because they've been out there, literally on the front lines in blizzard conditions, putting their bodies on the line to stop Line 3. So welcome, Tara. I'm so thrilled that you've taken time, left the front lines to be with us today. And I really want to know from you how it's going. What's it like right now there?
Bonjour, Jane. Thank you so much for your lifetime effort of advocacy for those voices that are calling out for change and for hope. I didn't leave the front line. I'm calling from one of the structures in camp right now. I'm calling in from about 200 yards off the proposed Line 3 route. We've been living in this camp for the last 3 years. Basically, when they started building Line 3 around the state of Minnesota, around my home territory, is when we started up and we knew it was coming. It's very cold today. It's 30 below zero is what we woke up to. So it's a very chilly day today, a beautiful day. I'm born and raised up here, so I love this kind of weather. I know some of our friends that are here from other places they never felt something like this before. So it's the kind of weather that makes you feel alive, and you can actually see the moisture in your body coming off, and you can feel it in your breath, and you can feel it crusting your eyelashes over and all the things. So yeah, it's been hard. I'm not gonna lie. We've had over 100 arrests in the last month. We've had many, many young people putting themselves on the line, Native people, allies that are chaining themselves to the machines. We are putting our bodies in front of the machines to stop them and try to reach the Biden administration.
So construction has actually started. God, aren't you worried about workers bringing COVID into your lands?
Yeah, so there's 2,000 out-of-state workers up in northern Minnesota. This is a pretty rural, remote area, and I mean, there's hot spots all over. Every single convenience store, hotel, I mean, everything you can imagine is packed full with pipeliners from out of state. This is supposed to be about local economy and local jobs, but it really is about bringing these folks in who have no connection to this place, no connection to this land to destroy it.
Do they wear masks?
I mean, they wear masks when there's cameras around. I would say like they're clearly not really caring that much about their the public health issues that they're bringing. And, you know, I don't even know that the company really cares about its own employees. One of them almost drowned last week. They broke through the wetlands up at the headwaters that you spoke of the Mississippi River headwaters. The excavator went through the ice and the worker almost died. They had to blow apart well, they didn't have to, but they blew apart a beaver lodge to lower the water and life flight him out. And there was a worker killed back in December. He got run over by a piece of equipment. So they paused work for a few hours, just kept on going. That's the company we're dealing with. They're also responsible for the largest spill in U.S. history inland. They almost killed a river over in Kalamazoo, Michigan. The Kalamazoo River is still to this day not cleaned up.
And they have equipment already at the headwaters of the Mississippi River?
Yeah, so they applied for some like variants to be able to drill under the rivers during the winter. They were denied that variance, but they are working everywhere else. So as close as they can get up to the wetlands, through the wetlands that they're allowed to, they're here. They've been here for the last month, and they're working as quickly as they can because of those lawsuits you mentioned. They know that that's happening in court. They know that there's many sacred sites and places that have not been considered. The tribal cultural resources, which to us are the living beings called wild rice, Monoman is what we call it. It's the heart of our culture. It's the heart of our people. It's who we are. And like many of these companies, just like in Dakota Access, here we are years later. The pipeline's already been under the river for a while, has filled multiple times. And here's the win late in the game. We're trying to stop that from happening here.
Tara, Winona has sent me bags of your wild rice. It is the most delicious, rich rice that anyone could have. I urge our viewers to, can you tell them how to get it? Honor the Earth sells it, I know that.
Yeah, honorearth.org sells it. There's different groups and places. I would highly recommend checking out some of the tribal nations actually that are opposing this project. So like Red Lake Nation, White Earth Nation, Leech Lake, Mille Lacs Band. Those are all nations that are opposing this and sell rice. But really the best way is to come out and do it yourself. I mean, if you get permission and you can build relationships with Indigenous people, which I think is really needed at this time to understand whose land am I on, who's still here, who's around me, because we are all over Turtle Island. This is our home. Yeah, you're going to be out in a floating bed of beauty and power and knocking rice, poling and canoeing and dancing on the rice and roasting the rice. It's a really beautiful process. That's what you
ancient legend.
Yeah, you can taste all that love in it. We're here actually because we were told by the creator to go where the food grows on water. This is the only place in the world that wild rice grows.
Wow. Listen, Tara, I have also heard with a heavy heart that that the man camps where these thousands of oil workers live in these rural areas, they've just metastasized across Indian country. And, a lot of those workers are decent people, but there are also men in the man camps who rape and traffic Native American women and girls. Would you talk to us about the man camps in your area?
Yeah, I would say you saw the Alberta tar sands and you saw what that looked like and the hurt, the enormous hurt of that. I visited the Alberta tar sands before the pandemic really took hold. And it was the first time that I actually felt so much empathy for these workers because they're doing something so unnatural. They're breathing in toxic fumes every day. They are ripping and rendering and raping the earth. That is an unnatural thing to do as a human being. And so a lot of them are dealing with drug problems, drug addiction problems. They're in and out. They are obviously putting themselves in really dangerous situations. I mean, workers are getting killed and the company doesn't care. They just keep moving forward. And it's a situation in which you're doing something inhuman. And at the same time, I would say that there's also an understanding that they know that our communities where these projects go, because they go somewhere else. They don't go in Hollywood. They don't go in rich suburbs. They go somewhere else. They go in the places that no one sees.
Right?
Sacrifice zones. Where the places that no one sees, the last untouched places, out of sight, out of mind, right? Like that's a big problem with all of society and the way that we operate. But they know that when they're in our communities, we have jurisdictional issues. We can't prosecute them at the same rate as Native offenders. They know that we're basically hands tied when it comes to that. And so the rates of violence and sexual violence and drugs and just criminal activity always goes up when these projects show up in our communities. And it's a really damaging thing for our people, in addition to our living world.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's scary as hell. I mean,
yeah.
I'm in a situation where like last week we had this beautiful action where these Quakers from Maine came and brought their prayers and their music and their beauty and their hearts and stood with us to block a fueling station with a piano, and they're playing music out in the cold, like sub-freezing temperatures. And it's this beautiful, powerful moment.
Ooh.
But then after that, like one of the workers like made sure to like crack my windshield, and all that stuff because the hostility is so high. It feels dangerous. You can't go anywhere by yourself. You have to be really, really cautious because these guys know us and we know them. I got followed a couple weeks ago on the road out in the middle of nowhere by these two workers. I thought they're going to run me off the road. I mean, someone just almost had their pet got poisoned or something like that. Like,
oh God.
The level of division and separation they create between us through these projects is really violent.
I felt that when I went to Alberta with an Indigenous woman friend, and we flew over in a helicopter, and it felt like my skin was being peeled off my body. It hurt so bad to see what used to be a boreal forest, which is now like an open wound. And then I visited the town, and word got out that I was there, and I was so scared. I mean, the violence, you could feel it in the air, shouting and yelling and coming at me, because they knew what I represented. I represented a desire to close down the tar sands, and and yet as I looked down from the helicopter, I could see that most of the trucks were driverless. A lot of it is already automated. These guys don't realize that their jobs are going to be over so soon, and already they're being replaced, but that's why it's so important that when we call for shutting these things down, that we always make it clear that we care about the workers, that we want them to have good union jobs where they can build a career and support their families and everything. That really, really helps us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm born and raised up here, right? Like I'm born and raised in a rural area, and one of those places that people don't really know, right? The place where, northern Minnesota is where the cabin is up on the lake, or you go hunting during hunting season or whatever. You come here to enjoy the environment because the environment is so beautiful. But I also recognize that the jobs that we have access to are usually jobs that are extraction. So we have to work in a mine, or we have to cut down the forests, or we have to build a pipeline, or else we're not getting a job. And that dynamic of a lack of investment into rural America is killing us. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have other options. And so you're kind of creating a catch-22 situation where the only economy is that. And so you have very, very limited options. And
but it doesn't have to be, does it?
Think of the thousands of jobs that would be created if Line 3 was decommissioned and they had to pull it out of the ground and clean it up. Think about the thousands and thousands of jobs created if they had to shut down the tar sands and do the remediation. That's going to take probably decades and decades and decades to even get that back to a place where you can maybe eat more than one fish a month out of the lakes. I mean, we're talking extreme contamination, people that have cancer all over the place. I mean,
and the deer and the moose and the fish all have tumors and malformations, right? I mean, that's what my friends up in Alberta told me. But Winona taught me that you can grow hemp there. Hemp could be a major materials part of our materials economy, the way it used to be at the time of our founding fathers. So you can grow hemp, and there's the wild rice, and then there could be local co-ops of energy generation from wind and panels, solar panels and stuff like that. You don't need to rely on fossil fuels. Is this right? Do you think I'm right?
I mean, absolutely. Like, there's local economy, of course, and that's like that is where we need to go, is recognizing that when you're engaging in society and it's, your comfort comes at a cost. It comes at someone else's hand, someone else's stolen labor, someone else's, dehumanizing. That's where we're at right now. Our consumption is so high. Our belief that we need these things is so, so high. And we don't, most of the stuff that we have is just stuff. And it's stuff for our temporary time here in this plane of existence, right? Like, we talk about the seventh generation for a reason. Nothing that we have really belongs to us. We're just here temporarily. Property, that whole concept doesn't work with Indigenous people. It's more communal property, right? Communal territory. That's what we're talking about, and the life of that place. When I think about how much export do we do, like, almost everything that we get now is outsourced overseas. Where's the investment into America, into Canada, or so-called America and Canada, into Turtle Island? Where's the investment into building and growing our own food, into being self-sufficient and radically reducing our consumption?
Yeah. So we one of the things that we have to ask of the Biden administration, along with shutting down these pipelines and phasing ourselves out of fossil fuels, is making sure that the new energy is publicly owned, that it's locally owned, decentralized. You can't decentralize fossil fuels, but you can decentralize turning the sun into energy and the wind into energy. I want to read something that you wrote in this book that I love so much. Taking a stand with the land is far more accessible than many realize. And I hope far more of us do it with our bodies, our choices, with whatever we can give to truly espouse and teach values that reflect life. The simplicity of traditional foods from a local ecosystem can feed a soul. The decision to build community and live a life of empathy, balance, and humility is a value shift badly needed. And I've been so moved over the months that I was in DC, and even now virtually with Fire Drill Fridays, that all the Indigenous people that came and spoke at Fire Drill Fridays spoke of that along with everything else, we have to re-examine who we are and what our values are, and change. What else can we do? Tell our audience what we can do to help you.
Well, if you want to do something to the level that the Quakers did, and many others who showed up here, including Indigenous relatives from all over Turtle Island, you're welcome to come and take a stand with us. We're engaging in COVID safe protocols and being really creative in this time. We can't have thousands and thousands of people and become another COVID hotspot, but we've been doing the best that we can to do a couple delays a week of this construction, a couple actions a week in the freezing cold up in northern Minnesota. We've got people that have been crawling into pipes, people that have been standing in front of machines, people that have been praying in lodges, all kinds of different actions. We had a tree sit that was up for 12 days in the freezing Minnesota winter, blocking one of the drill pads over the Mississippi River crossing. So there's that critical piece. That's what I write about in that essay. It's about how we actually have to take a real stand with the land and give voice to the voiceless. That the marching and the petitions and the policy change and the elections, yes, all of those things are important. But at this point, with this urgent crisis that's in front of us, we have to respond with urgency. And that requires self-sacrifice. It requires bravery and using our agency and our power, our people's power. We are so powerful. We're so powerful that us standing out on a front line has resulted in the militarization of northern Minnesota, of tanks and riot gear and tear gas and all that stuff being purchased by sheriffs in 2,000 population towns. I mean, that's the response that we've gotten. If you can't do that, if you're not, able, or maybe that's not where you're at yet in your pathway, please share. Please let the message be heard. Remember that our struggles are interconnected. That when we talk about Stop Line 3, we're talking about Dakota Access, we're talking about Oak Flat, we're talking about Mountain Valley Pipeline, we're talking about Trans Mountain Pipeline. We have to stop this endless extraction. Please reach out to the Biden administration, to Gina McCarthy. She sits now in that chair. He wants to be the climate president. We'll let him be the climate president. Line 3 is the largest tar sands infrastructure project in North America. We have a Democratic governor here in Minnesota, and he approved this pipeline. He's done nothing to stand with the Indigenous people when it comes to this. He promised us when he ran that a pipeline through treaty territory was a non-starter, and here we are, and we're chaining ourselves to the machines. That's where we've lost that connection, so we're looking to the federal government to do something different. Violating our treaty rights has to stop. You can't just keep going down the same thing because you've done it so long. It's not okay to keep doing the wrong thing over and over and over again. And
thank you.
Listen to young people.
Yeah.
Listen to young people.
We're going to start taking questions from the audience now. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Maddie, over to you.
Great. From Carl on Facebook. Tara, how exactly do pipelines work? Is the oil fed by pumps or is it manually done?
So what happens in for tar sands extraction, why it is the dirtiest fossil fuel in the world, is because it's the most carbon intensive. So it's this clay bitumen substance that's mined out of the ground. Then they mix it up with a bunch of chemicals and water to make it into this kind of like sludge. And they put it in these giant cycling things, almost like a giant dryer. Then they cycle the water out. They have tailings ponds that are essentially lakes. Then they have this clay product and they're putting it into the actual pipe by electrifying the pipe. And the electrification of that pipe and all the pump stations along the way are physically moving that clay, that it's not even clay anymore, it's sludge along the pipeline. So here in Minnesota, it takes all of the current nuclear energy in Minnesota to run Line 3 through this place. It's an incredible amount of energy to push sludge through a giant pipe.
Thank you, Tara. From Jamisha on Zoom, how has eminent domain played a role in pipeline fights?
If you're a landowner and you are in the way of where a pipeline wants to go, you're going to get someone that's going to show up at your door and they're going to tell you, I'm going to offer you this much money. And if you don't say yes, I'm going to take your land and I'm going to get permission to it. I've seen that play out in many, many struggles across this country, including at Dakota Access Pipeline. I mean, you had a 80-year-old farmer who was out there and she stood in front of a pipeline in her backyard and she got arrested. I mean, those things happen all over this country. It's considered in the public's interest to have access to these projects. But it's worth noting that in line 3, I mean, this oil isn't even for us. It's actually for foreign export. It's to bring fossil fuel dependency to the rest of the world. We're just the pass-through point.
Thank you, Tara. From Danny on Zoom, how are Dakota Access Pipeline and Line 3 the same, and how are they different?
Yeah, so I mean, Dakota Access Pipeline is fracked gas or fracked oil. It's a pipeline that would, well, it did actually. It was built through the Couchiching territory, so near the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, and it passes through the Missouri River, and all the sacred places along that route. Line 3 is a tar sands project, and it passes through wetlands and the treaty territory of the Anishinaabe people, my people. So you got Lakotas next door and Anishinaabe here, and Dakotas next door too. It's really just two sides of the same coin. It's the coin of greed. It's the coin of destruction, of perpetuating cultural genocide on Indigenous people and not listening to us. All the tribes said no in both those pipeline instances. I mean, you've got 3 different nations here that have said no, and you got Standing Rock over there that said no, but here we are.
Thank you, Tara. From Avery on Facebook, I had no idea there were so many oil spills. Why do we never hear about them? And what are the long-term impacts of these spills? Should we be focusing on cleanup technology?
I think a big reason why we don't hear about these spills is also the same type of reason that we didn't hear about Dakota Access Pipeline on national news until the military was there and threatening to basically stand against lines of veterans. It's just not a story that these guys cover. And, you trace back the money, right? Who's behind the broadcast network, who's invested in these projects, who's controlling the narrative. I think there's a couple things to that, which is controlling our own narrative and building our own media is incredibly important. Having people who are learning how to tell stories, listening to Indigenous storytellers, listening to local storytellers of that place, that's critical. When it comes to cleanup technology, I mean, they've made some advances, but when it comes to tar sands sinks in water. There's really nothing that they are able to do in a real way that's going to completely fix the problem. We have a lot of cleanup to do in this place as it exists now, from not just tar sands and oil pipelines, from all kinds of different extractive industries that have been engaged in over the years.
Thank you.
I just want to add one thing though.
Yeah.
Word originally got out to people. People became aware of the Dakota Access Pipeline fight when young kids, I mean, one of them was 9 years old, ran in a relay from Standing Rock to Washington, D.C. to present a petition to the Army Corps of Engineers, telling them to stop the pipeline. I just want to call out those brave young warriors who did that. That's when I first found out about Standing Rock and the fight. That
was me too. I mean, I think, and that was, again, like, that's independent media, right? Like, so their story and Respect Our Water, I mean, they just did another run this last week. That's how I got involved. That's how many, many, many tribal nations and people from all over the world heard about that story. We were so powerful in controlling our own narrative in that President Obama was asked about Dakota Access Pipeline in Laos, and he had no idea what it was. I mean, we were reaching the globe, but it didn't get on CNN and New York Times until the violence and the brutality was really, really apparent. You have CNN is coming up to where you are, right? CNN is supposed to be here next week. Good. So hopefully that is enough to tip Gina and Joe and all those guys into the right direction of, you can't be a climate president if you're if you're allowing the largest tar sands infrastructure project to go through. Yeah.
Thanks, Tara and Jane. We have a question from Cruz on Zoom. Do you know if the pipeline employees understand the protest against this construction? Do the employees ever reach out to the protesters or support you?
I mean, I think we kind of are, we're put in these oppositional roles, right? And that's actually one of the pieces that hurts me the most. Like, beyond all of the, destruction that you see, I mean, that part is by far the most hurtful, to see the land rendered in front of you, to see these beautiful places just ripped apart in a matter of days. Sometimes it's hard to explain and convey what it feels like to see something like that, and to hear something like that, and to feel it in your feet, to feel the earth being ripped apart. That's really painful. But the division that happens, and the infiltration of these companies into our communities to pit us against each other, that is just like so immoral on so many levels, that you've got workers who sometimes are very hostile and aggressive, but then there's also workers that are just trying to like do their jobs and stay focused on what they're doing. And I've been in hearings with these guys. All of us here, we've been in years and thousands of hours of hearings about this project, saying no, 68,000 comments against it. And I remember I was in this hearing and I was talking about the lack of investment in northern Minnesota, the fact that our workers should be building solar and wind and other manufacturing that's locally based, instead of building this pipeline through our water, through their kids' water. And I had pipeliners come up to me afterwards and thank me for that. They're like, I know we're on opposite sides, but thank you for saying that, because I don't really want to do this, but it's the only choice I have. It's not the only choice they have, but I think there is some people who are very deeply conflicted about what they're doing.
I remember at Standing Rock hearing that one of the militarized police members knelt and prayed with the water protectors. And I've read that they're at line 3. When you confront the militarized police, you can see their fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're
these
afraid
guys
of sweetgrass. They're afraid of the prayers. They're afraid of the ceremonies. It's interesting. They know the power.
They're afraid of someone who's willing to stand there unarmed in front of them. Like, right. They're standing there behind a riot shield and their face shields and their big turtle suits and all these weapons and tear gas and everything, right? And you're standing there unarmed with sweetgrass in front of your land, in front of your water. You're standing there to give voice to the voiceless. That has to scare the hell out of them. Yeah. To see someone that's so committed to something that they don't understand, or maybe that they do.
Yeah. We have time for one more question, Maddie.
Perfect. Thank you, Jane. From Hugo on Facebook. Tara, how has traditional art worked within your resistance movement?
Art is so beautiful. Art is an incredibly powerful and important part of any resistance. I mean, there's art behind me right here, right? When you can bring beauty into these places and spaces, it's a way to humanize us, right? Because they try to tell us that we're protesters, that we're violent, that we're agitators, or whatever the heck the narrative is. We are water protectors, and we're following through with our duties. It's my duty as a woman, as an Anishinaabe woman, to be a keeper of the water. It's my duty to protect that for the life to come. And when we can show art and use our creativity to convey that, to not be some like faceless person or something like that, but to be a real humanized person, it's incredibly, incredibly powerful and important. Please visit Giniw Collective. Please get involved if you are not already, and check out the fight to stop line 3 at stopline3.org.
Thank you, Tara, so much for taking time away to come into your little home close to the front line and bring us up to date in such a moving way with what's happening. I'm deeply touched. Thank you.
Oh, and pull your money out of the banks. Defund line 3, big campaign. Please do that too.
Stay safe. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you so much. Miigwech.
And Fire Drill Friday's team has decided to devote 5 minutes every Friday to hear a story, a song, or a poem that speaks to climate and the environment. It's a way to get out of our heads and into our hearts. these issues are not partisan issues. They're not about politics. They're about day-to-day lives of our families, the health of our communities, the future of our children. So this new segment will feature voices of those on the front lines of the climate movement who are fighting every day, sometimes, as you heard from Tara, against extreme odds to build a more just and sustainable world. And we're calling the segment Stories from the Front Line. And our kickoff storyteller, I admire her so much. I have met her before, a 19-year-old woman who spoke at the first in-person pre-COVID Fire Drill Friday in Los Angeles last February, and she's really something. At age 9, Nalleli Cobo engaged in community activism for the first time. Growing up across the street from Nalleli Cobo Energy, an oil well in her community, Nalleli noticed that her health took a turn for the worse. She worked with her community to create a grassroots campaign called People, Not Pozos, which means wells in Spanish, in hopes to permanently shut down Nalleli Cobo Energy. Nalleli is a co-founder of the South Los Angeles Youth Leadership Coalition. She's a member of Stand LA, who works tirelessly to establish a 2,500-foot buffer between oil extraction and homes and sensitive land. Please welcome Nalleli.
Oh, Nalleli, you're on mute. If you could unmute, that would be great.
Got it. Hi. Thank you so much, Jane Fonda, Fire Drill Friday, and Greenpeace for having me today. I am very happy to be here. I remember a year ago being on stage with you guys, creating history with all of you guys at the first Fire Drill Friday in LA. And it's crazy to think at this very event a year ago, I disclosed some very personal and fairly recent news health-wise. I was diagnosed with cancer January 15th of 2020. But I have since come out victorious. I am officially a cancer survivor. After 3 surgeries, 7 minor procedures, 3 rounds of chemo, 6 weeks of radiation, and fighting off 2 infections, I am cancer-free. It's crazy to see how much the world has changed in a year, but it also goes to show how fast things can change, and that's how fast our climate is changing. And fortunately, the climate crisis is still solvable. We still have time to act if only we apply the same sense of urgency as we do to finding a solution to ending it as we do COVID-19. Maybe then I wouldn't have so much climate anxiety. But I know many of you are probably like, who is this girl? So let me introduce myself and share my story with you all. My name is Nalleli Cobo. I'm 20 years old and I have been fighting to end urban oil drilling and end environmental racism since the age of 9. I grew up in South LA and between USC and Staples Centers, but unfortunately 30 feet away from an active oil well called Nalleli Cobo Energy. They would release toxic emissions, which affected not only my health, but the health of my community. I suffered from body spasms so severe I couldn't walk. I would have to be carried from place to place. Nosebleeds so intense, I couldn't sleep horizontally. I had to sleep upright to prevent choking on my own blood at night. Heart palpitations, I used a heart monitor for several weeks. I have stomach pain, nausea, the list goes on and on. Nevertheless, we as a community raised our fist in the air and began to fight for our right to breathe clean air. I am a very proud co-founder of People Not Pozos, People Not Wells, which is a grassroots campaign in South LA that fights to permanently shut down Nalleli Cobo Energy. In 2010, we began to share our stories at town hall meetings, city hall hearings, filing complaints with South Coast AQMD, really raising awareness and letting people know what was going on, how we were being poisoned by this silent killer as a neighbor. Years passed, and in 2013, we were very fortunate to have the LA Times write a story about us. That story captured the attention of former US Senator Barbara Boxer. She flew out and had a press conference with my community and pleaded Alango to cease operations. And I'm very proud to say Alango Energy has been temporarily shut down for 7 years due to our community efforts. We then noticed we weren't the only community being affected by oil extraction. It's such a big issue. Los Angeles is the largest urban oil field in the nation, and we don't talk about that because we're too busy keeping up with the Kardashians. Approximately 580,000 Angelenos live within a quarter of a mile or less to an active oil and gas well. So Stand LA was born. Stand Together Against Neighborhood Drilling Los Angeles, a coalition that works tirelessly to end urban oil drilling in the city of LA. I'm a very proud co-founder of the South Central Youth Leadership Coalition, and together with Communities for a Better Environment, Wilmington's youth, we sued the city of LA for rubber stamping and violation of the California Environmental Quality Act, better known as CEQA, and we won. As a result, now when reopening or expanding wells, there is a new application process, which includes a new application itself and a memorandum. People often ask me why I do this, why I fight, why did I start at such a young age? And it's simple. I fight because I believe everybody has the right to breathe clean air despite their age, their gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, or zip code. Clean air is a basic human right, which is still being denied to us in 2021 when we claim to be such a progressive nation. Environmental racism is real, and it's happening here in our very own homes, and we're not aware of it because we're not educating ourselves on the issue. I fight because nobody should be poisoned in their own home. I fight so no child has to go through what I've gone through, so a little girl doesn't have to worry about her ability to have kids in the future. Oil wells don't belong in our communities. It's time to stop drilling where we are living. It's time to switch to clean, renewable energy for our health, our safety, and our environment. Thank you so much, Jane. Back to you.
Thank you, Nalleli, so much for sharing your inspirational story. Thank you. That almost brings us to the end of today's show. Deepest thanks to Tara for sharing your insights and updates about the incredible resistance against Line 3. It's so necessary for people to know what is really happening on the ground there so that we can stand in solidarity. However each of us are able, we all have our own ways of doing it. To all of you watching, join with the countless people across the country taking action this week to pressure Biden to step up and stop these polluting pipeline projects. We're finding creative and impactful virtual ways to make our voices heard and show our collective strength, since it's not safe for many of us to do so outside. We're inviting each of you to make a sign with a message asking Biden to stop Line 3. It can be as simple or as creative as you want. And then share a photo of you with your sign on your social media with the hashtag #BuildBackFossilFree. The goal is to continue building pressure on Biden to take action by continuing to grow our movement. And we've made it super easy for you. Just go to firedrillfriday.com/takeaction and download the easy to follow toolkit that has everything you need to know, including sample language you can use for your social media posts. And if you haven't already, add your name to the Line 3 petition we told you about last week, and you'll find that link in the same place, firedrillfridays.com/takeaction. And thank you to the climate warrior that joined us today, and to each of you that are joining us each week, and to those of you who are new to the firefighter family. I hope you'll come back. We're all in this together, and together we're going to win. Next week, we're going to be revisiting the Thrive Agenda. The Thrive Agenda is kind of the legislative version of the Green New Deal, and sharing some exciting and hopeful updates about it. Hope to see you there. And now don't go away yet. We're going to end today with a beautifully animated and creative stop motion video that we made to highlight that Biden has the authority to act on climate in a bold and visionary way. and that together we can be the pressure he needs to follow through on his promises. Take a look, and I'll see you next time.
No exhale, no line free, no distraction by our homes. No pollution in our community, no sacrifice zones. In the era of fossil fuel production, deliver us lots of jobs and justice. It's a possibility if you build it fossil free. President Biden starts today. Better have climate on the brain. The planet ain't got the time to waste, and the people that's spoken. They say protect our communities, transform our economy. You say that you build it that better, so build it that fossil free. Build it that fossil free.
1201.
I wanted to show you this. So